Good morning, everyone. I am Laura Sasaki. I'm the Broadband Initiatives Manager here at the California Department of Technology and the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. I'd like to welcome you this morning to the California State Digital Equity Plan and Public Comment Informational Webinar. This will be recorded. It will be available on the Broadband for All website following the presentation, and you'll be able to view it there. I'd like to go into a few housekeeping items before we get started this morning. For the best viewing experience for deaf and hard of hearing, please select the side-by-side speaker mode that will enable you to see the ASL interpreters. We also have closed captioning available. That is at the bottom of your screen. You just choose the closed captioning and it will subtitle the audio for you. At the end of the presentation today, there will be Q&A. And so as we are going through the presentation, if you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to add questions for the presenters and panelists, we will address those at the very end. The order that we will be going in when we do address that is individuals who raise their hand. Please use the raise hand function. It has moved from where we have it on the screen currently. It is to the right of the reactions button. So you can use that raise hand feature when you want to ask a question when we are in the Q&A period. So we will go through individuals who raise their hand. Then we will go through the Q&A that's been submitted throughout the presentation. And then we'll also have the opportunity for those of you who may have dialed in to ask questions or raise your hand via phone. So I now have the pleasure of introducing the State Chief Information Officer and Director Leanna Bailey-Crimmins of the California Department of Technology to share a brief welcome and review our agenda.
Thank you, Laura, and good morning. Welcome, everyone, to the statewide Digital Equity Plan informational webinar. As I was nicely introduced by Laura, I am Leanna Bailey-Crimmins, the Director of the Department of Technology. And today we are honored to share with you and unveil the Digital Equity Plan. And it is an important part of what the administration, the governor, the legislature has been prioritizing when it comes to broadband for all. Over this past year, there have been over 50,000 participants from a California resident and for local community leaders that have come together to make sure that we are hearing everyone across this great state of ours of the potential barriers that are preventing us from participating and having that affordable, equitable access to internet, which all of us rely on in our daily lives. We have heard you, and the California plan's core objective was to ensure that we were identifying and making sure that we're also identifying those barriers that are looking at what does it take when it comes to connections across the state, making sure that we're looking at is there high speed availability in your area or not, looking at lack of potential access to devices and also digital literacy training. We know that it's important to have connectivity and it be affordable, but it's also just as important to make sure that you have the training to access the digital government services and commercial services that are available to all of you. From when we look at those barriers, when we were looking at the data, it was very clear that those barriers do not treat us all necessarily equally. When we look at the densest part of our urban areas and isolated areas of rural communities, what we have found is that regrettably, lower income communities are the greatest of need. And we need to make sure as we are looking at this plan, as it's going through its review process, hopefully you will be providing comments. And as we finalize it to work with the federal government, how we potentially can get some grants and dollars to help us address this inequity that we need to address in our state. I am pleased that 2.8 million Californians have signed up for the Affordable Connectivity Program that qualify, but there are many others that qualify for this discount as well. So I encourage you, if you don't know about that program, you can get more information from our website, and we can help with you and getting you close to a digital navigator to help you find those resources that you need. We want to make sure that as most is that we want to also show a video that will address our partner outreach, which will be addressed in our announcement here soon. So if we're at a point, can we go ahead and tee up the video? Thank you so much. And as you can see, one of the things we wanted to make sure is that this plan is, as we talk about, we walk the walk, we talk the talk. And so this plan is available in over 100 languages. It can be translated. And we work with Department of General Services, GovOps agency, and Department of Rehabilitation to make sure it was remediated. So that, again, because California is so great and it's so diverse, we wanted to make sure you had that opportunity to provide your comment. The pandemic we went through, and it affected a lot of our lives. It also pointed out the vast divide that we have when it comes to the digital divide. And one of the things that we want to make sure is we all understand as we go through and look at the plan and prepare for the vision of the future, there is no equity without digital equity. In the 21st century, we all rely on technology, if it be ordering food, jobs from a remote perspective, telework, telehealth, and just really accessing the services that most of us require on our day-to-day lives. So with that, I hope you enjoy today's presentation. Please, this is for you, so ask questions. We want to make sure that you have that opportunity to interact with us and figure out ways that you can continue to provide your comment, because this is a multi-stage. We heard you. We're going to hear you again through your comment process. And obviously, we want the final product to be representative of this great state. So with that, I'd like to introduce Scott Adams. He's the Deputy Director of Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. And he and his team have been pivotal in working with all of you, CPUC, and many other CBOs, the community-based organizations out there that have made sure that we were representing all of their communities. So Scott, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you, Director Bailey-Crements, and welcome to everyone. Just super excited that we can be here for this key milestone to present to you the draft digital equity plan and usher in and provide information and instructions on how to provide public comment, which is really the next step in soliciting input from partners, stakeholders, and residents across the state to make sure that we've got this all right. I am Scott Adams. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy at the California Department of Technology. And really, what I'm going to do is kind of briefly walk through how we got here. Next slide, please. So for those of you who have been working in this space for, in some cases, many decades and have been partners with many of the state agencies over the last several years, and particularly the last year in the digital equity and BEAD planning process, wanted to kind of tee up that obviously Broadband for All is the state's overarching program to close the digital divide and foster digital equity throughout the state. And really, Broadband for All is predicated on the fact that access to infrastructure and service, affordability, and adoption are all critical components to achieve digital equity in our state. Next slide. Real quick, I don't think this slide is going to be new to many of you, but we wanted to underscore the evolution of the state's coordinated efforts to close the digital divide, which really began with the formation of the Multi-Agency Broadband Council in 2010, and includes the work of the council member agencies and other state partners. It was further shaped by the governor's broadband executive order in 2020, further aligned by the Broadband for All action plan that was developed as a direct result of the executive order, and then really, further shaped and informed by the historic structure, framework, and funding that was set aside in Senate Bill 156, which developed the state middle mile broadband initiative on one side, and further allocated funding to the Public Utilities Commission to add to their suite of last mile infrastructure programs that include infrastructure grants and other broadband adoption account efforts. You can see really in 2021 with the passage of the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there were 6 key federal programs that were formed that have really been leveraged to further shape broadband for all. We definitely want to call out Assembly Bill 2750 here at the state level that directed the Department of Technology to work in consultation with the California Broadband Council, the Public Utilities Commission, and members of the public to develop a state digital equity plan. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the digital equity plan, as we've done over the last year, we want to make sure that we center that this plan and the instructions in the planning grant that funded it direct states to prioritize investments for 8 covered populations, which are the 8 populations that are featured here in the darker blue, which are individuals living in covered households, aging individuals, incarcerated or justice-involved individuals, veterans, individuals with disabilities, individuals with language barriers, members of racial and ethnic minority groups, and those who primarily reside in rural areas. And as many of you know, given that the digital equity plan and B planning process were closely aligned, that our joint data gathering efforts also included identifying barriers for women and those who identify as female and the LGBTQI plus community. So again, that is these populations are the main focus because they're most impacted by the digital divide. Next slide, please. We wanted to also stress and reiterate that many of you know, being participants and partners and stakeholders in the planning process over the last year, that we developed a multi-pronged cross-cutting process to enable engagement and to meet people where they were. So we developed a statewide planning group that really expanded the California Broadband Council to 22 statewide entities with a connection to providing services to the covered populations, or that had subject matter expertise, on the outcomes that we were seeking to empower. We developed the 6 outcome area working groups and brought in subject matter experts and residents to provide feedback at those. We had numerous digital equity surveys to assist in the data gathering efforts. And then as we saw in the video and as the director mentioned, we hosted 20 in-person regional planning workshops in every economic region throughout the state. And then our efforts were further informed by other forms of public engagement, which included individual meetings, consultations, listening sessions, and presentations that were kind of outside of the state's formal planning process. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the scope of engagement, you hear that number, about 50,000 inputs into the process. This kind of further quantifies where we got that number from. You'll see that we had the Broadband for All Summit that really kicked off this effort, and October of 2022. We had the participants at the 4 quarterly statewide planning group meetings, the participants at the 24 outcome area working group meetings. There were 466 respondents to the Dean tool. The folks who responded to the statewide telephone poll we did or survey that we did, really in partnership with the California Emerging Technology Fund and USC. Thanks to your partnership, we got over 43 responses to the online and mobile-friendly survey in every county throughout the state, which really allowed us to get additional information. And then there were the planning workshops and the meeting engagement. So California is a big state in geography and population, and this just demonstrates where and how we got inputs that helped shape this draft digital equity plan. Next slide, please. And so we want to pivot now and share with you a little bit about how the framework of the digital equity plan, how it's shaped and what to be looking for, and where to kind of focus the public comments. Because as Director Bailey-Kremen said, we have been very thoughtful and mindful to take the feedback and input in the lived experience of both the multiple levels of organizations throughout the state and residents. We want to make sure that we heard you, but we also want to use your collective wisdom and subject matter expertise to perhaps share with us where the plan could be further in shaped before it becomes final. So next slide, please. So real quick, you'll find when you read the draft plan, if you haven't already, that it is broken down into 7 different sections. There's an executive summary, which is the really condenses the plan for those folks who really want to absorb the contents. It's a fairly long plan to meet the requirements of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. There is a section that is really an introduction and outlines a shared vision for digital equity. There is a section on the current state of broadband and digital equity in California, a section that outlines collaboration and stakeholder engagement. There's a section on implementation strategies and key activities on how we will achieve digital equity. There's a conclusion, and then there is an appendices section, to provide reference, on the inputs that inform the plan. And you'll see later there's also pages on the Broadband for All portal that provide high-level summaries of the different inputs that help shape the draft plan. Next slide, please. And so the things that we wanted to draw to your attention, that in the executive summary, and we tried to break these slides down to like, why is it important? What's the key content to look for? And what are the highlights? And so the executive summary is really intended to provide an accessible summary of the entire plan, including the structure and the key findings. The key content that you should be looking for and checking is that it summarizes objectives of the plan, barriers to digital equity, and key strategies to achieve collective goals. And some of the highlights are how these goals align with the 3 goals of Broadband for All and corresponding objectives. It summarizes needs and barriers faced by covered populations in California that we heard from the planning process, and describes both the assets that we learned about through the digital equity ecosystem mapping process and the gaps. And then lastly, it outlines key strategies and implementation activities. Next slide, please. So when we go to section 2, that really starts the long form of the digital equity plan. And this will include an introduction and a vision for digital equity. It's really important because this is the shared vision and goals that all of us will need to work towards to achieve digital equity in the state. The key content here is to introduce a collective vision, a draft collective vision that was shaped by the inputs received through the process for digital equity, and it also sets objectives and strategies to achieve those goals. A highlight we wanted to draw for you is that in the draft plan, the vision for digital equity that aligns with the Broadband for All goals are a California in which all residents have access to high performance broadband, affordable service and devices, and the training and the support necessary to enable digital inclusion for economic and other social benefits. Next slide, please. And so the next section is on the current state of broadband and digital equity. Here, you will see in more detail, it sets the baselines from which progress on the plan will be measured, or the proposed and draft baselines. The key content are really to identify the needs and barriers for California, primarily covered populations, and the key resources that are necessary to ensure digital equity. The highlights here are throughout the process, we had heard that there are universal or common barriers experienced by most of those folks, including covered populations impacted by the digital divide. And those are largely around access, affordability, and adoption. But then also the thing to be looking for here are the specific barriers for covered populations that all of the planning process and the input from you all help shape and inform. Next slide, please. So the fourth section is collaboration and stakeholder engagement. It really outlines the inclusive and participatory planning process that inform the plan. It describes in further detail outreach approaches and engagement methods, and really highlights the planning process that all or most of you have participated in and helped get us to where we are here. The next section, please. So implementation strategies and key activities really talks about what is the strategy to achieve the shared vision and goals, outlining our priorities, particularly in relation to the outcome areas that this plan is seeking to empower in a digitally equitable world. So as Director Bailey-Kremen said, in education and health access, in economic and workforce development, access to essential services and civic participation, tribal collaboration, etc. The real highlights here are really summarizing these into 7 key activities and how they'll work to meet the objectives of the plan, how they'll address the gaps that have been identified, and how they will support and empower covered populations. Next slide, please. So you'll also see that there is a conclusion and an appendix. These really just will reemphasize how we're all proposing to work together to close the digital divide, and how we propose we all continue to collectively work together to make progress towards these goals. So there's a conclusion in an appendix, a concluding statement, and then, as I mentioned before, the appendix has supporting information and charts. There's sections A through Y. But as I mentioned before, and you'll see here on the Broadband for All portal, there's even more information that you can reference to help inform public comment for the state. Next slide. I believe that concludes my portion. I'm going to hand it over to Ann Wynn to provide information on where to find the digital equity plan and how to provide public comment. Ann?
Thank you, Scott. Morning, everyone. My name is Ann Wynn. I'm the Engagement and Operations Manager of the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy here at CDT. In the next few slides, I'll go over where you can find our draft state digital equity plan and where the forms are, as well as a few other pages that associate with the draft plan, and a live demonstration of all that as well. So next slide, please, Sana. So here's 2 screenshots of our STEP landing page, where you will find an overview of our draft STEP. And in the thumbnail, you actually will be able to read and print the draft STEP as a PDF. You'll see here on the read draft plan that will open to the draft state digital equity plan page, where you find alternative access to read and review the plan itself in the various sections that Scott mentioned just now. Please note it that you can go on the top right corner of your browser to select languages of your choice to review the plan, as well as all of our Broadband for All portal pages, and that the HTML version is compatible with assistive technology as well. And so next slide, please. In the STEP public comment form, which is the third link on the left navigation bar, you'll find the form itself. And here we'll have it for a QR code if you want to use your mobile device to scan it at this time. A member of our team will also drop it in the chat. And also the link is right here on the screen as well. And so in the next few slides, a quick review, and I'll make sure to also go into detail on a live demonstration, but wanting you to have a still image of how our page looked like before we get there. The public comment form for resident, if you're commenting as a resident, is shown here with the red asterisk, meaning that's a required section before you submit a comment. Want to note that you can comment on more than one section of the draft STEP. And also, if needed, you can use voice to text comment to verbalize your comment, and the form will capture that in writing before you submit. And please select organization if you're commenting on behalf of an organization. The fields change slightly, but not too much. And so you can find that on our page. Next slide, please. And a quick reference to Deputy Director Scott Adams below our landing page are various depository pages of different planning processes, work streams. We'll get on there to show you where you can find these, but state planning group, outcome area working groups, regional planning workshops will lead you to our past events pages where you can find recording, PowerPoint, summaries, as well as videos, photos of all of that we took part in together, and the 3 links to the surveys: the California Statewide Digital Equity Telephone Survey, the California Digital Equity Public Online Survey, as well as the Digital Equity Ecosystem Mapping Tool, also known as DEAM. There are reports, as well as quick 2-pager report for your high-level key findings. So without further ado, let's go on to the website and take a look. There we go. Just take a bit. Thanks, Anna. And so as I mentioned before, this is our landing page. The left navigation bar will get you to where I mentioned just now. So feel free to explore that. And let's scroll down just a little bit to the bottom of the screen, just so folks can see where the public comment form button is, as well as, when available, the submitted public comments will be available for you to read other folks' comments as well. And want to highlight that in addition to seeking your comments on the draft STEP, we have also reopened the DEAM tool for folks to input, about your organization and you would like to be added to the state asset inventory. So thanks, Anna. Let's take a look at the form itself. Cool. All right, so as we screenshot earlier, this is the Digital Equity Plan public comment form. Please note, and we have this on many places, that the public comment period will remain open until January 25, 2024. And at that time, it will be closed. So the form is pretty live and reactive. So, putting your first name, last name, and let's show folks how, if you select a different section, it will populate another comment section for you to write in. So let's choose, would you like to comment on a different section? Yes. And then let's choose, conclusion or 5. Perfect. And so you can comment up to 7 sections, and the 8th one is any additional comments not related to any of the prior sections. Thank you for the demo. And let's show folks how to use the translation tool. So up top, you see select language, drop down, and I'm going to use Spanish as one where we translate this page to. Right there. You were right there. All good. Perfect. So once you click on your language, the page will be translated. And as you navigate between pages, it will stay in that language until you click on Show Original, where that's when it reverts back to English. All right. So that wraps up my mini demonstration. Of course, will be available for more questions. If you need another demo, we'll record a portion of this live demonstration as well on the past event pages. So if you ever need to reference it. Oh, I see Scott raising his hand.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that where we are right now in the forum, that we make it clear to folks that the public comment form is intuitive. So there's a form for residents to provide public comment, and then if individuals are commenting on behalf of an organization or a group of organizations, that we recommend and prefer that you fill out the organizational public comment form.
Thank you for clarifying that for folks. And let's show them the submitted public comment page on it real quick. Perfect. So this you didn't see in the PowerPoint earlier, but as comments are being submitted, not immediately, but within a time period, we'll make sure the comments are reviewed and posted on here as it is submitted. You can use different filters to find the sections that's being commented on, and then we can, on default, it's sort by newest to oldest, but you can revert that. And then if your the submitted comment is by a resident, you can also filter through that as well. So thank you so much. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand the mic over to Monica Hernandez, who is our Deputy Director of Communications and Stakeholder Engagement for CDT. Monica.
Buenos dias, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to speak with you briefly today. First, I want to thank all of you and thank the team for the work to get here. You are all remarkable and have accomplished so much. In addition to providing your own comments on the draft statewide digital equity plan, we hope that we can count on you to help spread the word locally throughout the public comment period. In the announcement we sent on Tuesday, we included a link to a partner toolkit, and I believe we're also going to put a QR code on the screen so you can get to that toolkit easily. In the toolkit, you can find social media graphics and copy, a template newsletter to share with your community. This is really designed to be accessible, and the materials are available in 7 languages: Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Tagalog, Korean, Vietnamese, and English. Your ongoing participation and support in elevating community voice is greatly appreciated and greatly needed. I hope we can count on you again to spread the word throughout the public comment period. And I told you I would be brief. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Scott Adams. Thank you again.
Thank you, Monica. So real briefly, want to open it up to questions so we can start having the interactive section here. Briefly wanted to share what's next. If we could go to the next slide, please. So at a high level, where we are today is in the public comment period, which began on December 12th and will end on January 25th. The next step after that will be that the Department of Technology will integrate public comments, those into the final draft the final digital equity plan. We will submit it to the NTIA for a 45-day curing process. We will publish the digital equity plan sometime around the end of March of 2024. And then I think for the folks who've been involved in the process, this is a multi-step process. Once the plan is finished, once it's approved by the NTIA, there will be a notice of funding opportunity where the state can apply for its allocation of very specific and dedicated digital equity grant funding that will fund the things called out in the plan, like broadband adoption efforts, digital literacy training, digital navigation, device distribution, economic and workforce development, partnerships for training. That will come out sometime in the second quarter of 2024. And then following on the heels of that will be the digital equity capacity grant notice of funding opportunity. Want to note that that pool of funding will not be state managed. It will be a direct competitive grant program that entities in California will be able to apply directly to the NTIA for. And so at a high level, those are the next steps. And we can go to the next section.
Great. So we're going to take some time to answer some questions from the community here. As Laura mentioned earlier, we will first address questions of individuals who raise their hand, and I will announce your name, and we will pull you off of mute, as well as allow you to come on camera if you so choose. I was going to ask a question, but I see we have some hands raised already. So Rebecca Cuomo from LA County will unmute your mic. And if you'd like to ask the question, you are live.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. And I will not be on camera today, but I'm so happy to be here. And I just want to first and foremost say congratulations to the entire team here on the plan. I've already been scrolling through it and it looks really, really great. And I appreciate all of the intentionality that you guys put into it, and also making sure that this process is very easy for us to be able to submit comments. So a couple of questions that I have. So I, as you guys already know, Rebecca Cuomo, County of Los Angeles, Director of Digital Equity. So I am working closely with a variety of different stakeholders within the Los Angeles County region to provide collective public comment, especially as it pertains to collaboration on grant applications. So I know you guys touched upon this a little bit. So based on when I'm looking at the public comment feature, it looks like there's an opportunity for us to add like one primary organization's information. So if I wanted to include other organizations that are represented as part of the public comment, would I just include their organization's name at the bottom as part of the summary of public comment?
Yeah, thank you. And Rebecca, it's great to see you, and just want to thank you so much for your leadership and participation in this process to get to where we are. So if I think I heard you correctly, that, you know, given the size of LA County, that you are going to potentially pool together comments on the plan or specific sections that will be sort of aligned from different stakeholder groups that you work with, and wanted to know where in the form you would include the other entities. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. I would suggest filling out the organizational form, and then in the body of the section that you supply or that you provide comment, that you say, you know, on behalf of multiple entities, and then at the bottom of that comment list out the entities that, you know, are providing those comments. One thing that I would say, if you have any problems, if anyone has problems with the public comment form, we you know, are happy to have you contact us, and we'll make sure that we're capturing joint comments in the right way if it doesn't work as I just described.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And then in terms of what can be changed, so for example, as part of our engagement, we'll be primarily focusing on the key activities for implementation, because obviously that is what would be utilized to be able to implement key aspects of the capacity grant program. So my other follow-up question to you, obviously you guys included the process that you guys did for engagement, and there's certain things that are statutory requirements that can't be changed. So for example, the covered populations can't be changed. We've been advised that if we wanted to uplift other subpopulations to ensure that they align with a main covered population. So with that being said, is there any way for us to know what is included in the plan that can't be changed, so that way we don't waste time commenting on it?
That's a really great question, Rebecca. And really defer to your expertise. And again, we're happy to have an offline conversation about this.
Okay.
My recommendation would be, and then I really appreciate the acknowledgement that there are some statutory requirements associated with, the objectives that we have to achieve to receive the federal funding. But I would recommend making suggestions in the appropriate comments and the additions that you and various stakeholders would like to see made. We will consider all public comments and all recommendations. And when we, provide the final draft, one of the requirements is that we, and Sean Doherty from Broadband Equity Partnership, I think I need your help on this. We're required to actually put like a log of the public comments we received, those we integrated into the plan, and to identify, what sections and pages we made those changes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And one final question, I don't want to take up too much time, but in terms of public comment in the implementation and activities section, so when we're making public comment for the capacity grant program in itself, would it be best to provide public comment in that particular section? So let's say we had recommendations on, once you guys stand up your actual program, like what that would look like, what implementation would look like, evaluation, community storytelling, would go in that particular area of the public comment document?
Yeah, I think that's the right place for it, Rebecca, and thank you again for elevating this question for everybody else. One of the potential challenges of the sequence is we want as many of these recommendations and comments as possible. One challenging factor is that we're developing the plan and won't really know until the notice of funding opportunity comes out afterward, the very specific kind of rules and requirements and guardrails that are placed on the capacity grant funding. But it definitely allows the state to get a head start. We heard throughout the process that in an ideal world, given that most of the digital equity work occurs at the regional and local and even neighborhood level, and that the preference would be to have, a flexible grant program that would allow for existing and new entities to easily navigate the process to do that work. Just know that we're to some extent going to be bound by restrictions and guidelines, which we have not yet seen.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. I appreciate your clarity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And next up we have Evie. You are, I believe you just muted yourself again, but now you are unmuted. There you go.
Okay. Hi, this is just going back to some very basic question. When you were scrolling through part of the slide deck there, it looked like a barrier to access has actually been raised. The eligibility is it looks like it's even more challenging, lower to 150% of the FPL rather than the already the barrier to us Bay Area and LA folk from 200%, lowered down to the barrier of 150%. Am I wrong? Did I not say that?
Evie, thank you for the question. And you did on the covered population slide that the Digital Equity Act defined the covered populations, and the Digital Equity Planning Grant Notice of Funding Opportunity directed states to identify barriers for
To raise the barrier. It raised the barrier. When did that happen?
The
From 200% to 150%. When did that raise that barrier go up further? At what time? At what time did that happen?
It is so covered populations is defined by the Digital Equity Act, and in the NTI Notice of Funding Opportunity are defined as individuals living in residences at or below 150% of the federal poverty level. And so I think the way that I could answer this question is that while we are have to follow the guidelines that the federal government has given us in terms of following the definitions. What we did here throughout the planning process is that in high cost states and high cost urban areas in California, that for certain programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program and others, that that threshold is not higher. So, there is a section in the plan where we acknowledge that. But I do want to make it clear that we have not changed that definition. That is the consistent definition that we've used and worked towards throughout the process, because those were the guidelines in the planning grant we used to develop the plan.
Wow. It looked, I'd never heard that 150% figure. I only heard 200%. Wow. So that was originally what came down, or did that change since our regional meeting in the Bay Area? I guess it was in 2022, right?
Yeah, it didn't change.
And I think we met there. We talked there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Evie, it didn't change, well, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I would encourage that if we did not clearly identify that issue that you're raising, that be a public comment that you submit to us for consideration if we didn't acknowledge it clearly enough.
So we were talking, Scott, about actually in higher cost of living areas that it would be lower to even, less than 200%. Like in San Francisco, maybe 300, something a little bit more, because 200% in the Bay Area or LA is just ridiculous. It's, well beyond lower than the federal poverty guideline. Why not? Because San Francisco has its own poverty guidelines. So I wish we could follow those.
Yes, we acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you, Evie, for your question. Philip Newfield, we're going to unmute your line and allow you to access.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for everything that you and the team have done to put together the digital equity plan. I was in Washington, D.C. last week talking to some leadership with NTIA, and they said one of the most important pieces and they're most concerned about is how will the challenge process be played out at the state level to improve the counting of those who are unserved and underserved. And as you know, Scott, In our market here with Fresno Coalition for Digital Inclusion, we've got over 14 million speed test measurements that so far haven't been acknowledged in the CPUC maps. And it was a problem with the SB 156 federal funded account last mile data. It's an orders of magnitude greater than what's specified in CPUC. In our county, 4% is what CPUC says. The likely reality based on multiple source of data, somewhere around 27 to 50%. So just want to make sure, Scott, that one, there's support for anchor institutions and community-based organizations that have this sort of data. Ready.net and others can help us do challenges. And two, that the challenge process doesn't require indicating what plan tier someone's on. We know that the minimum plans are, for example, Comcast 50 meg. Let's just make the assumption that their basic plan is what should be performing and use that data. But that's going to be really important to make sure we achieve the state's goals of broadband for all, that we actually count where the unserved are and focus in that direction. So we'll be sending comments out as many others will, but I just want to make sure that we hit that mark, Scott. So you and all the team has done this great work, that we truly do use this moment in history to make a difference from an equity standpoint. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the comment, Philip, and thank you for your leadership and participation throughout the process. It was, I think, at one of the early education outcome area working groups that you provided an outstanding presentation to the folks about the unique efforts that you have been leading down in the Central Valley and in Fresno. So want to let you know that we hear you, and you'll see that in the plan itself, it acknowledges that while there's been significant improvement in broadband mapping data at both the state and federal level, that I think, as we discussed at the regional workshop, there is an acknowledgement and a commitment to evolving the state mapping and data gathering so that it reflects better reflects the lived experiences of our residents. So appreciate you being a champion for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Next speaker will be Kawina De Ocampo. And just a reminder for anybody on the call, if you'd like to ask a question, to raise your hand and we'll have you address live. And Kawina, it looks like the line is open.
Hi, thank you. Kavena is my coworker and shared this link generously. My name is Crystal Rawls. Hi, good to see you again, Scott. And I am at the Workforce Integration Network at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. My question is, I've already started, it's more of a comment, but also I wanted you to be aware. I've already started looking at the plan. And of course, the first thing I did was check the readability index. So given this 45-day period over the holiday point time, right, it would seem that if we really want people to be able to digest this information, we would have made it a little more readable. So right now, its basic index is at 15, which means you need a college degree to read it. And we shared this information back as we assessed some information while we were doing the state listening, the state or the regional listening. So I'd like to know, how does CDT intend to really engage community partners when we're looking at really short periods of time to digest a lot of information at a really complex reading level?
Yeah, and thank you very much it's good to see you again, and thanks for raising that. As you mentioned, this is the digital divide is a persistent and complex issue. It's quite complicated, and the challenge is, how do we communicate and put together the information in a way that communicates from a policy and implementation standpoint what needs to be done, but is also accessible to those who we are seeking to work with to empower individuals and communities. And so we've endeavored to make the current draft as accessible as possible. through language and other technologies. And we would appreciate any additional suggestions how through the public comment process we could make the final document more even more accessible. And so whether that's through public comment or you'd like to you know um, you know reach out to our office and provide some additional, we'd welcome any input you have on that.
Thank you. And as always, I appreciate all of the work that you folks do, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you so much. And likewise, it's a two-way street there. We acknowledge how much time and subject matter experts that the ecosystem has been so generous in bringing to the process.
Thank you, Crystal. I see no other hands raised, so answering some questions from the chat, I think that are very relevant for people here they might have. Scott, one question is, it looks like the comment page will not accept attachments. If you want to address that. And a second one that goes along with that, is there a limitation on the amount of text that can go into those text boxes?
Yeah, so I think two things. On the attachments, yes, there's not an attachment function, and so we would prefer and recommend that folks provide their comments in the comment box. We anticipate, given the size and scale of the engagement process, and we would hope that given the interest and participation in the process, that we'll get as many public comments as possible. So definitely would prefer that comments are put in the text box, and if there's references, perhaps put a link to where you would like to direct us. One of the challenges that we have is given the state accessibility requirements that are already in place, it's quite a bit of a challenge to manage and remediate and post those and make those documents accessible and any attachments that would be sent in a reasonable manner of time. And then on the issue of the character limitation, there is no word limit on or a character limit on those text boxes.
Great. And acknowledging we have about 1 minute left, I think this one last question would be good, is how will people know if my comment has been considered? Or I'm sorry, how will I know if my comment has been received?
Yeah, got it. So Sean or Ann, I'd love you to kind of explain how that process is going to work.
Sure. As someone submits a comment, you'll actually on the screen, it'll pop up and say, thank you for submitting your comment. And then you will get an email acknowledging it. And it'll actually have the text of what you've submitted. So you'll have an instantaneous acknowledgement on the screen, as well as an email will be received that says, thank you for your comment, obviously. And then we'll include the text of what was submitted in that application. And it looks like we're right at time, Scott. So we are at 12 noon.
So, Sean, I appreciate that. I think if folks are willing to go over, there are a couple questions that I'm not sure we answered in the Q&A, and to the extent possible, would like to make sure we answer as many questions as possible before we close. And
sure.
Okay, great.
Great. All right. I think there's a couple questions in here about ensuring access to students in rural or isolated regions where the digital divide is the greatest. What if entities in this area do not apply on behalf of those individuals? And that was submitted by Adeline McClain.
Got it. I think we very much appreciate the process, and I do want to say that the folks that were mentioned in that question, I believe, are inclusive of the covered populations that the plan and will focus on overcoming barriers for. I would welcome. We would welcome a public comment, perhaps in the implementation phase, about how we could go further. I think it's going to be incumbent upon the state to make sure that those entities that you suggest are aware. So if you don't see in our implementation phase enough detail about how we're going to outreach and make sure those folks are aware of the eventual capacity grant and the program that we develop, would appreciate your comments.
Wonderful. And another comment is around, is there a mechanism in place for stakeholders in the California Digital Equity Plan and the Raise the Bar initiative? They are initiatives of the U.S. Departments of Education, Labor, and Commerce. Is there a way for stakeholders to collaborate?
Well, certainly, and this plan acknowledges that collaboration is required. I think, given that we're all residents of this state, I think we can all acknowledge that, given the size of our geography and population and the level of need, that a variety of sources of funding and partnership are going to be needed, and that in response to the guidance that the NTIA has given us to develop the plan that really identifies existing efforts and how we leverage those, and to work with other entities and other sources of funding, including participation of the private sector and philanthropy, most certainly. And I think if would welcome a public comment that suggest how we can, potentially adjust our plan if we haven't done that and made it clear in its current draft.
Great. And another comment that came in from Andrew Broderick: how does the state plan for capacity building funding, or the capacity funding? What is the plan for reaching local communities? Which entities will be eligible to receive funding, and what criteria will the state use to prioritize how that funding is allocated?
Yeah, really appreciate the question. And hello, and thank you, Andrew, for all of the wonderful subject matter expertise and participation that you folks brought to the outcome area working groups and the regional planning groups, and that you shared with us. And so I had mentioned earlier in the presentation that the specificity on the requirements that we will have to follow for the capacity grant program that the state will develop will be included in the notice of funding opportunity that comes out for the block set of funding, for capacity grants to the state. So there's a certain lack of clarity around that right now. But suffice to say that we have heard from the community, as I had mentioned earlier, that we would like, we would hope that the NTIA provides flexibility for, a grant program to be developed that could be, as uncumbersome or onerous as existing, programs that would allow for new entities to, particularly those at the very local level where the work needs to be done. And so I think, Rebecca might have asked that question earlier. Andrew, we would love, any suggestions from the folks in San Francisco on how we might, what we might consider.
Great. And another question that came in from Crystal earlier in the chat is, will the DEEM tool provide the names of organizations, programs, services, funding, and other resources in a heat map visual? Yeah,
so a lot of pieces there, Crystal. So the first thing that clarifies is that the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool itself was developed for us to gather data from organizations and support the further development of a state asset inventory of organizations, funding, programs, tools, and resources that could be leveraged to support the implementation of the digital equity plan. So wanted to clarify, one piece that we've opened the Dean tool to further allow folks who might not have been able to complete that, during the formal process, to provide information so that it can be included in the final draft plan. I believe the second part of that question was, how are we going to take the information we gathered through the Dean tool and make it accessible to folks at the regional, county, even local level? We are looking through how we can visualize that, and I think would like to get your public comment on suggestions on how we can make that useful, because we do intend or we do suggest in this draft that that we regularly update the asset inventory, and that we leave the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool open to continue to build that asset inventory. But it is a proposed aim of this plan that then that information be shared with the public to help them easily identify partners to help them get connected and find training and digital navigation services or other things.
Great, and I acknowledge that Rebecca has her hand raised again, so if we want to unmute Rebecca. All right.
All right,
Rebecca,
thank you. Yeah, one last question for me. So I've been meeting with a lot of different stakeholders here regionally, and what I'm noticing is that there's a lot of different communities and different challenges and barriers sub-regionally as well. So how in the weeds do you want us to provide our public comment? So if there's any recommendations that are included as part of the plan, do you want us to clarify what community, city we're referencing? Like, how much in the weeds do you really want us to localize our input? Does that make sense?
I think it does make sense, Rebecca. Obviously, the draft statewide digital equity plan is a plan for the entire state, and so we've heard a lot of specific barriers. I think if there's important and unique barriers that are not included in the plan that are important in the plan, I would say be as specific as you and your partners feel you need to be, and we'll consider those.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of the weekend.
Thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful, and I believe that answers all of the questions that were posed in the chat, and I don't see any further hands raised. All right, Scott, I believe that concludes our question and answer portion.
Excellent. Well, on behalf of the California Department of Technology and the broadband office, we just are incredibly thankful and grateful for your continued partnership as we all work towards broadband for all. And we're, like I said, we're very excited to achieve the milestone of having a draft plan out for y'all to review and comment on. And we're, I think, just looking forward to continuing to tap your combined wisdom and expertise to kind of shape this final plan so that it's one that we're all proud of and we can all work towards and, leverage it to achieve why we're all here. And that's to get broadband for all and to close the digital divide here in California. So thank you very much.